Today on Locked On Suns, we've gone through all the options. We've broken down every permutation. I prepped for hours. Here it is. We will build the best case scenario Phoenix Suns offseason for 2024. You ready? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to kick off a short work week, hopefully for many of you. Happy Tuesday. Welcome back. Welcome for the first time, wherever you are, whenever you are. Thank you. Hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already. Get a new episode in your feed. We do this every day, Monday through Friday. Hit that button. Very easy for you. My promise, content every day, Monday through Friday, throughout the offseason and beyond. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns right here with the podcast. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 straight to your account with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Okay. What do I mean when I say best case scenario offseason? Well, it means realistic. It means within the realm of possibility, within reason. But I'm going top to bottom, so I'm not just saying, oh, it would be great if the Suns added this player. No, I'm breaking it all down. I'm giving you the options on the players the Suns signed last year, what happens on draft night, what happens in free agency, re-signing players who don't have an option. What does the final rotation look like? What do we look forward to beyond even the summer? All of it right here, right now. So let's start with those options. The Suns don't have control of this. Let me just say that first, right? This is best case scenario, but it's one thing the Suns don't get to choose, which is player options. If you remember, a lot of the guys they signed last summer, they gave these options to so that those players would have more guaranteed money if they wanted it. Now, I would say the guys, as a reminder, are Okogie, Gordon, Lee, and Eubanks. I would say that all 4 of those guys could go either way. I think Damian Lee, just from a security standpoint, given his pretty ugly meniscus injury, is probably the most likely to opt in. But I'm just going to tell you what I would like to see just to build the best Suns team out. Okogie in. I think a wing defender with energy is a good thing to have. He's the only guy for sure want back. Eric Gordon, I don't think it was a good fit on the court or behind the scenes. It didn't so much seem. And then Damian Lee, I just don't think you can't expect him to contribute. And then Drew Eubanks, it wasn't a great season in Phoenix for him, needless to say, but we'll see what happens. It's not only just important for clarity, which these are all due by June 30th, it's also how many other roster spots do the Suns have to fill? Because, it might sound like the least of anybody's concern, but when we're talking about all these different things they could do, right now, heading into next season, the Suns have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 slots filled on their roster already, and that's without re-signing Royce O'Neale or Bol. That would get you to 13, and then suddenly you're running out of room pretty fast here if you want to make improvements. So what those guys do is pretty big, separate from whatever role they might play next year. The draft. That, of course, is the first big order of business, and a lot of the draft might even happen before we know about all the player options. But here's what I think. So, of course, the Suns go into draft night with the 22nd overall pick. They also would have had, a pick in the 50s, but they lost it because of their tampering with Drew Eubanks. So the second round only has 28 picks. The draft only has 58 picks this year in the NBA. Sixers, I guess, helped the Suns out, did them a solid by making them not the only team to lose a pick. But anyway, so that's what they have at their disposal. I am of the opinion that I know on Monday's episode, if you listen to that one, Brandon and I did the predicting kind of our holy crap off seasons for the Suns, or imagining a holy crap off season. And of course, Bronny James would be an option here on draft night. I proposed the concept of the Suns using one of the draft picks that they have on hand to trade this year, which is this pick, of course, 22, but also their 2031 pick, which would become available to them on draft night. Trading some combination of all of that to move off of Jusuf Nurkic, free up some of the available assets and resources that the Suns could potentially get if they moved from being a second apron team to just being a first apron team. But the more that I poked around here, I just don't actually think that that's not going to happen, in my opinion. Even if you get off of Nurkic and only get back a minimum player in return, you're probably talking about also losing Royce O'Neale for nothing, just not re-signing him and bringing in a minimum player instead. And even then, it's not a slam dunk that it's going to happen. Unless the Suns wanted to trade one of the big three for less salary and probably Nurkic or something like that, I don't think it's really going to happen. So with that said, as I'm looking to the draft, I'm thinking, again, as we've mostly spent most of our time talking about throughout this early part of the offseason, I'm thinking, what can I attach to Nurkic to get a player back? Okay, so the best one I could come up with when I'm looking at teams that have cap space that could maybe take Nurkic back and, send something that is a little bit less in salary. Also has, I was prioritizing teams that had a second additional pick that the Suns could maybe get to even out the value overall. I'm not saying this is the absolute best Jusuf Nurkic trade I could possibly think of, okay? But I think it checks a lot of boxes, and I think you're better off finding a team that has the cap flexibility to take him rather than expecting a contending team or some kind of team trying to win to want Jusuf Nurkic on their roster. He just costs a lot of money and is a difficult fit for the same reasons he has been for the Suns. So with all that said, Charlotte is where I landed. Jusuf Nurkic to Charlotte, along with the 2031 Suns first-round pick, top 4 protected. So Nurkic plus a top 4 protected 2031 first for Grant Williams, Trey Mann, and the 42nd pick this season. Okay? Grant Williams, Trey Mann, and number 42 this year. What that allows you to do is get a little bit more depth on the wing at the forward spot, add another point guard-ish bench creator option in Trey Mann, and then get a pick at 42 that you could still draft a player with. Another option, just for the sake of not pinning myself to one avenue, that does not include that additional pick and isn't quite as big of a deal, would just be Jusuf Nurkic plus that top 4 protected 2031 pick straight up for Quentin Grimes in Detroit. Now, if Monty Williams stays the coach, honestly, Nurkic is a pretty good fit for how Monty likes to play. Grimes is not quite as big on the wing as you might like, but definitely fills that sort of point of attack defender option, and if he could make his threes, that could be a really valuable young player for the Suns to bring in. In the draft, notice what I did there. Best case scenario, the Suns can use that 2031 pick, not this year's pick, to get something and get off of Nurkic, which would allow them, of course, to then draft a player with 22. I've fluctuated back and forth on this, and this is where I, again, go to best case. Best case, the Suns do both. It's not trade Nurkic or take a player. Maybe it's both. And this avenue would be an ability to do both. So with the 22nd overall pick, the Suns pick Kel'el Ware. Number 1 has basically the same name as Superman, which is very cool. Number 2, he's a little bit older than your Eve Missies and some of the other bigs that might be Day'Ron Holmes. I think he actually might be older, but is a little smaller. You have Filipowski and Edey, who are more traditional, bigger, less athletic guys. So I went with Ware, who kind of splits the difference between the freshmen, the older guys, the small guys, and the big guys. He's big. He's a little older. I think he could contribute, and he's a center with real center size. Jalen Bridges, number 42 overall pick, which they would get if they did this Charlotte deal. He's just a wing who can shoot, has comps to Mikal Bridges and whatnot in the Ringer's draft guide. I want to be very clear. I do not know nearly enough about the draft to be absolutely positive of what these guys' outcomes will be in the NBA, but I'm doing my homework. I'm reading up on the names, watching some videos and everything else, and so there we go. What this means is the Suns keep Nasir Little, and that'll matter as we go along. So far, Josh Okogie is on the roster. Grant Williams, Trey Mann, Khalil Ware, and Jalen Bridges are all on the Phoenix Suns roster. Next up, who do they re-sign? For how much, and where do the Suns look in free agency? We'll get to all of that coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more because it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more over at FanDuel. I have a great one for you. The Phoenix Mercury on Tuesday night are underdogs, 8-point underdogs on the road in Connecticut. I'm not going to quibble with that line. The over-under is pretty decent to it. It's like a 170 or something. So whatever. I'm not going to touch those. What I will touch, Kalia Copper to score 25 plus is plus 100. She is plus 360 to score 30 plus. I really like that. She's hit 30 plus like half the time this season already. Just one to keep in mind. Their WNBA stuff's been great this year at FanDuel in addition to the NBA as that postseason winds down. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. All right, let's keep the show rolling. Here is where we are headed next. And I want to remind you guys to check out Locked On NBA all playoffs long for daily breakdowns of all the big games, the offseason moves, coaching searches, and more. Free agency. So the draft is out of the way. The Suns were able to add some depth at a few positions, get off of Nurkic, trade a protected 2031 pick while also selecting two players. We're on a roll. We're moving. We're feeling good. First, let's talk about who the Suns have on their roster that they need to decide on. Bol. Let's start there. I've said this before, and I'm still sticking with it. Keep him. I think of a lot of the players the Suns have on their roster, Bol jumps out as somebody who really could blossom even more than he did last year under Mike Budenholzer. He's never been able to play a real role on a real team until a couple years ago with Orlando, and that faded by the end. Phoenix did it again last year, so this would be year 3, really contributing to winning basketball and learning lessons and developing. He's entering sort of, what his prime should be age-wise, and he's been healthy. He's a small ball big. That's what Bud has... every team he's ever touched, they've been able to make good things happen in that realm. Go to Boris Diaw in San Antonio, but even, obviously, Al Horford and Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez, and that player type he really wins with. So Bol, I'm giving him a player option like the Suns did with Gordon and Okogie and all those guys last year. So the deal is 2 years, $4.9 million with the player option on year 2. And I'm re-signing Royce O'Neale. You gotta, right? You gave up a decent amount of second-round picks for him. That was your big swing. I think he played fine. He played as well as Royce O'Neale should have been expected to play in the playoffs, right? He's streaky with his shot. He's not quite as big as you might like, but he is a rotation player in the regular season for sure. And in the playoffs, I think as your 7th, 8th man, you could do a lot worse. And in this case, for the Suns, he was like their 5th guy a lot of nights. So in a smaller role, I think you feel good about it. So I'm not giving him Grayson Allen money. He's not as impactful and valuable as Grayson Allen, but I'm giving him a raise from his current contract, which is about $9.5 million this past season. And I'm going to give him a touch more than the mid-level exception, just as hey, you've been underpaid most of your career. You had a good season. We know you have some leverage against us because we got to bring you back if if I'm James Jones. So 3 years, starting at 13 million, increasing by 5% every season, which is what NBA contracts mostly do. Brings us to 3 years, 41 million. I'll even give him a player option on year 3, just kind of tie a bow around all this, make it as attractive to him as it possibly can be. 3 years, 41 million for Royce O'Neale. Gives the Suns a rotation player, as I mentioned, but also in the future, another potential salary to trade. I mean, think about where they were when they traded for Beal. They had zilch, nada to deal in other trades. They eventually got back when they broke Ayton up into 3 contracts. That helped, but they ended up trading 4 minimum guys for O'Neale, kind of illustrating you don't want to put yourself in that situation. So now you have Allen. You won't have Nurkic anymore, but you're going to get players back for him in the offseason I'm dreaming up here. O'Neale, Allen, those guys, you're increasing your flexibility bit by bit here, in addition to just, keeping talent in the building. Next up is good old regular free agency. The thing that I think most fan bases are most hyped about, although I don't think for the Suns it'll be the biggest stuff that happens. As I mentioned, draft night's going to be, I think there's going to be a lot going on. We'll get to even actually after free agency to close the show, but I have 2 guys, and they're Chris Dunn and Goga Bitadze, all right? A guard who can handle the ball and defend at the point of attack, and a big man who can protect the rim and is skilled enough offensively to stay on the court. Okay? So let me just start by saying the Suns could get neither of these players. If you told me that these were the 2 most in-demand, available kind of, not even second draft, frankly, because these guys are each already on their second or third team, but sort of like buy low rehabilitation project players for good teams, they might be the 2 top of that list. So the Suns could get neither. The Suns could get just one. Both of these guys could even just make more than the minimum, and the Suns would be priced out from even getting them. But if it, again, in a best case scenario, in the most imaginative, a world I can create that helps the Suns the most, I'm trying to get both. So I'm doing the same thing as they did with those guys last season here as well. Player option on the second season to give them that much more increased guaranteed money, I should say, and flexibility to kind of decide their own fate. And just as a refresher here, I mentioned this in last week's episode talking through some of these players, was don't think of it as a year-by-year thing. The Suns, with the Dunn contract, for instance, it would be 2 years around $5.5 million. That, think of that as $5.5 million, not 2.75 or whatever, okay? Because that's the money that they're getting in their pocket if they sign that contract. Of course, they have to want to be a Sun for 2 years and feel good about the situation, but that is why the Suns could compete with another team, even if that team might have a bigger offer on the table. Remember, we thought Eric Gordon might have had full mid-level exception offers from Dallas or not Golden State. They wouldn't have been able to do that, but maybe Dallas last year, in addition to some smaller offers from the Clippers and the Warriors, and he chose a minimum with the Suns with that player option, and so it can happen. So for Dunn, it would be 2 years, 5.5. For Bitadze, it would be 2 years, 4.8. Okay? If that all happened, man, I think you'd feel pretty great about it, right? Again, you're adding now Mann and Dunn as guards. You're adding Bitadze and Ware from the draft as bigs. You're adding, you're keeping Bull and O'Neale and Okogie in place, and then you're getting I said Bitadze and Ware, and then obviously Grant Williams in there as well if that trade were to come to pass. So we're getting toward the final stretch. Let me tell you what the final rotation is with all of these moves made, and then actually look beyond the offseason. What could happen early season, in season, that they would need to set themselves up for this summer. And what am I not doing here in my best case scenario Suns offseason? We'll get to all that next. All right, let's close out the show. The rotation, as I have assembled it in my best case scenario Suns offseason thus far, is at the guard spot, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Chris Dunn, and Trey Mann. On the wing, Grayson Allen, Josh Okogie, David Roddy is still around, Nasir Little is still around, and then, okay, so I put Eric Gordon as a maybe because I'm not sure what he'll do, and then Jalen Bridges, who is the player I just popped in there at 42, which is the pick I have the Suns getting back from the Hornets in the Nurk trade in this exercise. If Gordon did stay, if even Lee stayed here with their player options, you could, I guess, have a player at 42 that becomes a two-way guy. Maybe then you don't keep Bol. I don't know. Domino effects, again, that's why I started with those player options. But that's the wing rotation. Forwards, Durant, Grant Williams, Royce O'Neale, Bol. Big men, Goga Bitadze and Khalil Ware. Now, okay, so I think it's a little thin on the big men, right? Especially, look, if you were to, part of what's tough with the trade having to basically come on draft night is if you were to trade Nurkic and not get a big man back in that trade, which again, my pick there was Grant Williams, Trey Mann, and number 42, and then you don't get Bitadze, things get really bleak really quickly. I mean, Andre Drummond could be an option. He would have to turn down, he would have to opt out of a bigger contract and then get a minimum. Maybe the 2-year thing helps him, but that's unlikely. And also, he's not the most versatile guy. He doesn't really feel like a Bud center to me. Felt more like a Vogel center. So that's the risk you run with the Nurkic side of things, and that's where I'm probably the most skeptical. But if this were to actually happen, you have Goga, you have Ware, different types of players, but I think Ware, a rookie big as a backup, like you could do worse. And then you have a lot of small ball options. Kevin Durant, Bol, Grant Williams, and then you have size up and down the roster in a way that allows you to maybe go to that stuff a little bit more, right? Imagine a lineup where you have Dunn out there and you have Williams plus like Durant or O'Neale or Bol, and then a smaller center. Those are more sturdy small ball lineups than the Suns were able to assemble this past season when they were having to put Gordon out there or Little out there, and those guys just aren't physically stout enough to actually play that way. So, okay. Let's look ahead to the later part of the offseason, which is when Grayson Allen can be traded. I believe it's somewhere in mid-October, and it seems unlikely to me, all right, because you're talking about training camp will be over. Like, the Ayton trade to bring Grayson Allen in happened really late in the offseason. This would be even later. I think it's like the 15th or 16th of October. You just don't see a lot of trades happen at that point in the offseason. So I don't think it will happen. But keeping him was still the right move, even though you're hamstrung a bit this summer from being able to trade him because the value was just too good to hold up. One, he has experience coming off the bench. I don't think he's a temperamental guy. If you make moves this summer where, like in my exercise here, I could see Grant Williams becoming the starter on this team. I could see Royce O'Neale getting the starting job if Bud just wants to be a little bigger than Vogel did, Allen could still come off the bench and have a ton of value, especially if there's a world where Gordon is leaving. And the Suns can then turn him into a piece who fits better, right? I think another contending team could look at Grayson Allen and think, well, can he be our Dante DiVincenzo, who went to the Knicks after a bunch of little stops? And he's, of course, cheaper than Allen would be, but on a great team with star players and a good defense, DiVincenzo was able to slide in and make a really big impact as a off-ball scorer and a defensive, team defensive piece at the very least. So look, I think fit-wise, just to keep in mind for Allen as we're thinking through what the offseason could look like, Philly, Orlando, New Orleans, Minnesota, Memphis, the Lakers. He's not going to be any of those teams' top priorities. And again, it can't happen in the summer, but, any team that wants to win now and needs some shooting, I could see them looking at a trade with the Suns to say, we'll give you some, wing and forward depth, which you need, or a big man, and you can send us back Allen. Hey, maybe the Suns even get a pick back to replenish some of this. I don't think they'll want to do it. They're not shopping Grayson Allen, and again, they can't do it now, but just, mark that page in your head, because I don't think it's going to be the last we hear about Grayson Allen, despite the extension. And even if it can't happen now, think about last year, right? The reason Allen came to Phoenix and the reason they made the Ayton trade was because it was all hinged on Damian Lillard, of all things, right? We never went into last summer thinking the Suns would be involved in a Damian Lillard trade in any way, shape, or form, but they definitely were. They were the focal point. Ayton was the best player that Portland got back in that. So if the Jimmy Butler situation in Miami or Karl Anthony Towns or Brandon Ingram, these guys we know might be available, if that gets held up at all, or Donovan Mitchell for all we know, Darius Garland there, you could see each of the past few summers between Durant and Mitchell and Lillard, we've had these things loom throughout later into the summer. It kind of is this never-ending cycle now versus for a long time when everything got decided in the first week of July. So what are we not doing here? I gave you the rotation. I ran you through the moves, but there's a lot missing. I mean, I think first and foremost, no LeBron, no Bronny. I just don't think it's realistic enough for me to sit here and do a whole episode building a team as if the Suns are getting LeBron James on a minimum contract. So I don't want to not bring it up at all because I don't want it to seem like I forgot, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm not going to have it here. No Nasir Little deal, right? And no second-round picks going out. Remember, the Suns still have 2 of those if they want to use them, but I didn't use them here. So they still have that. You could easily imagine a Nasir Little plus 2 seconds type of trade at the deadline. So they maintain flexibility to do that. No Royce O'Neale sign and trade to a different team, right? The Suns cannot acquire a player on a sign and trade, but they can send one out. So Royce O'Neale going elsewhere and the Suns getting something, that's technically allowed here, but I did not do it. I mentioned I'm not trying to dump players to get under the second apron line because I just don't think it's really possible given the constraints they have if they're not making a big 3 trade, which is another thing I'm not including here. No big 3 trades. It would be kind of crazy, right? It would be kind of crazy for me to sit here and say, best case scenario, Suns offseason, and then I'm like, trade Kevin Durant. That'd be dumb. So no big 3 trade, no getting under the apron line, and no major point guard acquisition, right? In this reality here, as I mentioned, I'm probably rolling into next season with the starting lineup of Booker, Beal, Grant Williams, Kevin Durant, and Goga Bitadze. That's my starting 5 in this dream world. And then off the bench, you're talking Chris Dunn, probably Royce O'Neale, Grayson Allen, Bol Bol, and Kel'el Ware. That's probably the bench unit, So I'm in there, not really. Chris Dunn is sort of a point guard, and, I'm getting a little more playmaking in the form of like Grant Williams, for instance, and keeping Royce O'Neale, but and Trey Mann, who more of a scoring guard who just happens to be small than a pure point guard, but I'm addressing some of their weaknesses, but I didn't make it a priority here to say, let's go get TJ McConnell with all of this. So that's excluded from my imagination here as well. But I think it's really good. I mean, I've told you guys again and again, my priority here, if I'm the Suns this offseason, is add at least one trustworthy, reliable rotation player to the roster with the assets that they have. So, of course, you're probably removing one with Nurkic to Bitadze. I don't think it's a for sure thing that Bitadze is a reliable postseason guy, but I don't frankly think Nurk in every matchup is that either. But I'm adding a bunch of darts at the board, right? Dunn, Grant, Batadze, Ware. That's 5 guys in the mix who wouldn't have been before, who could break through, in addition to still having the big 3 plus Grayson. So, look, it's not a sure thing. Maybe some of you are thinking that's the best they can do. Are you kidding me? Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong. Last year, for instance, I did this whole thing and I did not even mention Bradley Beal, and then like a week later they got Beal and I looked like an idiot. And I'm ready to have all that happen, and suddenly LeBron James is on this team or something, or they trade both of the first round picks they have with Nurkic and get some player I'm not expecting. There's all sorts of stuff within all of this that I could be wrong about. I'm not telling you this is going to happen. It's not. I'm going to get a lot of it wrong. But I think it's a good exercise because you get a little bit of your juices flowing as far as what kinds of players they could get, what the deals might look like, where the weak points are, both in their roster and in the marketplace of guys that they can go and acquire, what's actually out there, and how much better can they really get. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more content just like this throughout the offseason, don't forget to hit follow or subscribe. We'll be back with another episode tomorrow. Want to talk about Bradley Beal with Steven to close out the week, so look forward to that. Where does he fit into all this? Was the way he was used last year really his ideal role, or are we going to see yet another version of that guy under Bud this upcoming season? So lots to get into, lots of rumors and reports flying, all of it right here every day. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.